Welcome back to Shock's Talks. I'm Shakti, and today is Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, and we have a new UAP whistleblower who came forward just a couple of hours ago. So we're going to talk about that today, and also I'm going to brag about this great accomplishment of finally finishing Abduction, which is 422 pages long and covers 13 cases of abductees investigated by John Mack. And they're extensive. And I was about halfway through this book and just kept struggling to get through. And then I took the day off today and I spent 7 hours reading so that I could finish it. And it finally kind of crystallized for me, even though I was struggling when I was in the middle to really hold on to the information. Sometimes it's hard when you're reading a book to really make sense of it all, especially when it's so dense with information. But now that I made it to the end and read all of John Mack's analyses throughout the book, every chapter he tells the history, a little bit about the person, his work with them, what came up as a result of that hypnotic regression work, and then he gives an analysis, and then at the end he kind of comes to a few different conclusions. I've also been watching a couple of his interviews recently, or his lectures, just to kind of, get a sense of him as a person, to see his face and hear his voice, and he is astounding. I'm really excited to talk more about his work, but today I want to talk about the new Weaponized episode that just came out. So it's funny how we have these little kind of peaks and valleys of exciting UAP news, but Weaponized with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, they've been churning it out lately. The last 3 episodes have all been really important and major, and today was no exception. So I'm going to talk about what happened, and I've linked below the interview. This is part 1 of I don't know how many parts they're going to do, but they're talking to this guy, Matthew Brown, who is coming forward with information about this program called Immaculate Constellation. So let's just go right into the notes here, and then I'll close out with a couple more thoughts from John Mack. So basically, this episode is filmed. It looks like it's taking place in some kind of remote location. It's a little bit dramatic. They're at some kind of a cabin, and George and Jeremy and this guy, Matthew Brown, are all in a room together. And I'm going to be honest, this guy seems scared poopless. I can never remember what I can say on here. He seems genuinely scared, and I don't mean to laugh at that. I'm literally just laughing at myself for not cussing, because I'm sure I've done it on other days. But it's important to note that he seems legitimately terrified, and they make a really big point to contextualize the risk that he's taking by asking him so many questions in the beginning of the interview. So basically they're asking him, what did you find out? What are you going to tell us about? And what it boils down to is he somehow has scratched the surface of this secrecy, this government secrecy, and he kind of starts to explain that it goes far beyond just our government or any government. It's a global, coordinated apparatus. I don't know, secrecy apparatus. So he said, simply put, it's a parallel reality. And it's not just in the military or intelligence agencies. And he says it has been allowed to corrupt and affect every aspect of our society to benefit an elite few. So this is a big deal. He's not the first person to say something like this, but there's a huge gravity to the way he's expressing this. And they ask him basically what could happen as a result of you coming forward, because he's showing his face, he's showing his name, and he's talking all about his work in the Pentagon. And he's like, basically, I could end up executed. It's that serious. Imprisonment is possible. He's hoping that it won't come to that. But it does seem pretty serious and pretty scary. He is just breaking all of the rules by coming forward and talking about these things openly. He's not doing any kind of like, what did you call it? Like when Grush came forward and was like, oh, I can't say this or I can't say that. This guy's just saying it all. There was one name that they mentioned in the episode that was redacted. So for some reason, George and Jeremy probably had their own reasons for why they didn't mention that name. We'll get to that later. So anyway, it's a big deal, him coming out. So let's talk about who he is and why we should listen to him. So first of all, he seems really scared about the future. He says things like, I have many reasons for doing this, but basically look out at the world. Look inside our country. We are not heading to a good future. And when he says this, it feels heavy and serious because we're all feeling that right now. It's not a good time. Things are very tense right now and scary. And every day I'm feeling it, and I'm just trying to kind of refocus on the immediate reality around me and take care of myself and my loved ones and all of that. But it feels urgent. It feels extreme. And he's kind of echoing that feeling that so many of us are having. And this is coming from someone who worked in intelligence, so it's a little scarier to hear coming from him, but also nothing new, no surprise there. Things are bad and they look like they're getting worse, So he basically says his biggest fear is what humanity will do to itself out of fear and greed. He says we have built an invisible prison around ourselves, but it is not complete. And there may still be time. Now, this was especially noticeable to me because I read something very similar at the end of John Mack's book Today, and this book was published in 1994. So even though these things come out and they have this feeling of urgency and like extreme fear, every time there's a new whistleblower, they're afraid for their lives. It is real, it is scary, but a lot of people have made it through this process and have stayed alive, at least so far. Yes, others have not, but like we still have Grush out and about as far as we know today and doing work. And let's hope the best for this guy, Matthew Brown. So basically George Knapp is saying like, well, there's no going back now. And Brown says, on a personal level, I'm giving up my future. He said he's proud of what he's accomplished in his time in government, and it's painful to leave the good people there because, as we know, it's always a mixed bag, but he had to leave. This is very similar to what we heard from Lou Elizondo. And he talks a little bit about his history of how he got into it. And it started off with a degree in international affairs. He came to Washington, D.C. He started working in a think tank, and then he took a job at the Pentagon. And apparently this is a pretty typical pipeline. And he loved his job. He said he felt a lot of pride every single day walking into that building. He was cleared by the DEA for a top secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information clearance, and SCI. And basically, like, UFOs and aliens aside, it's just once you start learning about all that you can learn about at the Pentagon, you're in a whole different world already. So just being exposed to intelligence and the experiences of the people around you. It's very eye-opening. And this really annoys me. I just hate it that there's these huge institutions that are hoarding knowledge and information, because it's not just national security stuff. They have all kinds of information, and he makes a point to say, yeah, there's a lot that's happened in reality that's never written on a piece of paper. So, you know, of course he felt good going to that job, because it's like you're in this ultimate position of power, or so you think. You're really just like so many steps below the higher levels of power, but you feel empowered because you have access to information. And you can tell that that was part of what gave him a sense of pride in what he was doing and made his job very exciting. So another thing that happens in these intelligence agencies is they have their special servers, and they have their own secret internet. They basically have their own internet that started at the same time as ours. But it's different. Obviously, we don't have access to it, and there's different levels of clearance for different parts of that internet. And basically, there are the people that are posting to it are like inside of the defense agencies, military and intelligence agencies. And so that's a big part of how he ends up coming across this project, Immaculate Constellation, is when he's digging around in those servers that he has access to. So he also mentions that there are many shells to our reality that our academics, our media, and our military have no idea about, and sometimes purposefully so. So again, driving home the point that these institutions of power are manipulating all aspects of reality. They are purposefully keeping things from all of us and creating an illusion that these academic institutions or scientific institutions have all of this knowledge and it's available to all people. But there's more than what we all have access to. And even the people in the upper echelons of academia don't have access to all of the latest and greatest, basically. And again, a lot of people talk about this, and it's like, to me, this is another example of that ontological relief. It's like, I feel this. I know this to be true. And so when I hear people say it, it's like, yeah, I believe that, because I already feel that that is probable. It's such an easy conclusion to come to when you just observe the way people are, human nature, and the power that is available to some individuals based on their privilege and their resources. And of course, you can jump to these conclusions, how they're going to use that power, what they're going to do with it. And it goes so deep. So it's frustrating to me to think about that, but this is part of what this guy is talking about. And he was in the Pentagon for over 5 years. He moved into the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, same field, different work. And he talks about the structures here, which again, we're reinforcing things we've heard from other people. These government management teams are often working with private contractors. So the staff is often a contractor, people on fellowships, people from think tanks and universities. And in his experience, he was working on a team, so he wasn't totally siloed. They ask him about that, like, you know, how the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is up to. Like, he was like, well, I had a team. We were all working together. We had like a equal level of access to information, and we're sharing among us. And then there were other teams that were doing other things that were different from us. But he felt like it sounded like he had some camaraderie in his role. And he also mentioned that he was working in a good department where they really took care of their people and cared about everyone outside of work and stuff like that. So again, there are good people in these systems out there. And there is day-to-day oversight by the government, but there's also going to be a lot of stuff that the government doesn't get to see, and that's what he gets into once he starts discovering some of these secrets. He also got a master's of security policy study at George Washington, and they did ask, like, were you under surveillance? Did you have to do polygraphs? Like, are you allowed to tell your wife about what you do? That kind of stuff. I don't even know if he has a wife, but he did not answer that question. He kind of said something else in response to that, so we didn't get to find out if he was under surveillance in his job. I assume yes. He does look back on that time with a lot of happiness, and then they're like, all right, tell us when it starts to sour. So basically, he was diving too deep. He had access to these servers, and he was doing a little bit of, like, he called it volunteer work. It wasn't even his job, but he was sorting files there. It sounded like there was a server in his department that had kind of a random dumping of stuff that had been uploaded to it, and he was sorting it to all the different places that it was meant to live in. And he comes across, sounds like a slide deck, and it was titled Immaculate Constellation. And he starts, just to kind of give a little more about these servers, just so we all understand what's going on here. They are classified servers, they're secret, but everyone in the Pentagon has access. So everyone can look at what's on there. And I guess there are entirely different systems for the truly sensitive stuff, he said. And it goes back decades, like I said before. So they ask him a couple more questions about, like, UAP footage that he was able to see on these servers. And he does talk about what we talked about in our last episode, the Tic Tac, the gimbal, and the Go Fast videos, which came out in 2017. Like, he looked at that just like everybody else did. But then he said on these servers, there was tons of other stuff just like that, but longer durations. And sometimes you would get a crystal clear video for like 15 seconds because of the data. Like, we talked about this in the last Shocks Talks. You usually see these blurry videos, but he mentioned that there were a few crystal clear image captures that he was able to see that were shorter, and then a lot of the blurry stuff that we all see, but just longer duration, so you can see more of the activity. And he does talk about how he has access to live feeds as well. So he can tap into that. He knows how to access it. So sometimes he would monitor some of the live feeds. And it was sufficiently clear that nuclear facilities and anything nuclear gets visited all the time. He confirms this, which we have heard many times before. And just skimming my notes here. He goes into some discussion of Grush and how in the Pentagon, everyone was like, at a certain point, it was like, don't even speak that name or you're fired. You're literally fired if you even mention Grush. And again, Grush is a big deal because he came forward and spoke to the Congress. And that was in 2023. And he's still talking to people and trying to do what he can to kind of bring a lot of this stuff out of the dark and get the congressional oversight that we've all been hoping for. But it seems like, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. You know, this thing is so much bigger than the government. And that's kind of what Matthew Brown is alluding to. He says that there did feel like there was a time when Grush was first coming forward that everybody was excited and wanted to start comparing notes and sharing information. And then there was kind of this clamping down. These power structures from above started shutting it down. And then it became like this really scary thing where you can't even mention his name. And they also asked him, was that the same with Elizondo? Was his name a name you could never mention? And Matthew Brown said, no, actually, that wasn't the case. Sorry, my dog is barking loudly in the background, which is why I shut the door today. So we always get a little bit of a either dog toe tapping, a sneeze, a cough, or some barks. Calm down! The weather is doing something. Sounds like we might be getting a little bit of rain. Okay, so let's get into this thing that he found. So he comes across this file. It's some kind of slide deck. It says 2018 Shriver, that's SCHRIEVER, War Game Brief or something like that. And he's trying to recall this with his memory. It happened 7 years ago when he came across this. So again, it feels all urgent, like, oh my God, everything is so scary right now when you're hearing him talk and watching this interview. But this was 7 years ago that he first came across this. These things have been going on for a really long time. To all of us who have been studying it, actually, nothing that he's saying here is that shocking. So when you go to watch the interview, keep that in mind, is like your emotions will be stirred because you can feel the energy of what he's bringing to the table. But when we really zoom out and look at the big picture, this is not a surprise to anyone who's been researching this stuff. So basically he finds this thing. It has some connection to the Shriver Air Force Base, like a logo or an image of that. And then he sees a slide with Lou Elizondo's face. And let's look at Lou Elizondo's face right now, in case you forgot. This is him. Boom. I don't have fancy high tech, but I have books. You can look at them and see things. Anyway, so yes, Lou Elizondo wrote this book, Imminent. I don't know if it's flipping things backwards because I'm using the front-facing camera, but this book came out after Lou Elizondo quit working for the Pentagon, and he was working for ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So in this document, in this slide deck, there's some kind of text here next to Lou Elizondo's face that says, Immaculate Constellation is an unacknowledged special access program established after the exposure of ATIP in 2017 by former USDI officer Lou Elizondo. So that's not too shocking to him, but when he goes deeper in, he basically says that the tone of this was like some kind of internal response to like everything that was coming out in 2017. It was kind of like an oh shit response. Okay, there we go. So that was the tone. And the file, he doesn't know when it was created, but he could see when it was last accessed, and that was in 2018. And he could see the name of who had looked at it, and that's what they redacted from the episode. But they do say that it was a she, and she wasn't at the Pentagon then. Everyone was saying she wasn't at the Pentagon then, but she was there to his knowledge, and they were saying she wasn't there. So that's a little mysterious thing. Maybe later we'll find out who this she is. I'm sure the deep divers already know. I'll have to do a little research and see if I can guess who they might be referring to here. But basically, the mission of the Special Access Program here was a collection incident in the Pacific Ocean, a large black triangle floating in the air. So there was an image that he found. And a lot of times these kinds of missions would not be articulated fully. They would be sparse, and then they would get these inserts later that were placed in them to explain more. So he was able to piece together all the pieces and figure out what was going on here. And basically, it was some kind of surveillance and reconnaissance of UAP or RV or ARV, and those are reproduction vehicles or anomalous or alien or advanced reproduction vehicles. So we're talking UAP. So this whole thing, Immaculate Constellation, is gathering information on all of the sightings, all of the imaging, the radar, the sensor data, like compiling it in one place. So, you know, that's, of course they're doing that. Again, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. But what was interesting about this is that the image that they were looking at was captured hovering over some Russian Navy ships. And this happened, we're going to look at the globe, Kamchatka Peninsula. So this is far eastern Russia. It's this peninsula right here. And kind of a remote-ish location, the way he was talking about it. It was like out in the Pacific Ocean. These Russian Navy ships were gathered. I don't know if he mentioned how many. I didn't have that in my notes. And this black triangle craft just appeared above them. It just seemed to appear as in it either decloaked or it phased into that position or whatever. It's almost like it was there already. And the Russian vessels had no response. And then, the implication or like the analysis from the text that he was reading in these slides was that the Russian Navy had foreknowledge that that would be there and that they were collecting data on it or interacting with it. So again, there's this air of like, oh my God, this is so scary and crazy. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is interesting information, but like, are we shocked? Not at all. This is, of course, everyone around the world knows that this is going on. Everyone is trying to interact with and understand UAP. If they don't already, who knows what they know? And maybe we're going to find out more about that in part 2, because he felt like he had more information, but it just didn't come out in this first part of the interview. This was basically the gist of it. And they talk a little more about so this project was basically the collection and centralizing of all of this data for analysis and operational needs. And this particular slide deck or document had 12 pages, and that's about it. That's about all that he covered. I want to go back up in my notes here because there was something else that I thought was interesting. Well, I don't know what it was. Thought it was just something about his reason for coming forward. So, okay, just to recap, the things that really stand out to me here, obviously, we can be skeptical and we can speculate and wonder if this is legit, is it real, can we trust him, So let's think about all the things that have happened in the recent past. I had this same feeling about Grush when he first came out. Is he legit? Is this all part of are all of these guys part of some kind of orchestrated disclosure process? Okay, maybe. If that is the case, what I would conclude is that we're not getting the whole story and we're not getting the truth. We're getting pieces of truth mixed with disinformation, a continuation of the legacy program. Why would it be any different now? Why would this apparatus of secrecy that has only been gaining power over the years all of a sudden be breached somehow? It just seems so improbable, because this has been going on for like 80 years, and they would only be getting better and better at what they do. So yeah, it's possible that all of this is part of that, in which case we just have to kind of take it with a grain of salt and sort of keep an open mind and, just keep listening, but like not take it too seriously. But then again, if we are to take it at face value, and if it is real, and all of these people are legit whistleblowers, and they've just been coming forward and sharing what they know, which is limited, everything that they're sharing, it does track with the history that, it tracks with what other researchers have been, what do I want to say here, have been the conclusions that they've been coming to. So I don't know. We got to just kind of keep listening and see what else comes out. But what's important is to put all the pieces together ourselves. So we're not following just this new wave of people coming out of the Pentagon, but we are combining that with independent researchers, independent journalists, abductees, experiencers, Navy accounts, Air Force accounts, civilian reports of UAP sightings, mass sightings throughout history. We are taking all of that data and looking at it. We're not just listening to what is coming out of the intelligence agencies, because that is, always going to be a little bit suspicious, because we're dealing with something that is completely tangled up in this long-term cover-up. And that's difficult, but it also just feels so frustrating. Like we're also out of our league. Like these huge institutions of power have gotten to a point where it's like, is there even any hope? Is there even any chance of contending with this stuff? Or are we all just at the mercy of it at this point? It's really hard to say, but my little grain of hope is that at least this one whistleblower today did say that the building of the prison is not yet complete. And that's really important and haunting to think about, because what might that prison be? I think it's probably the surveillance, the full-on surveillance of all of us, and limiting our ability to authentically connect, express, and exist. And we're already limited in our ability to access information in this reality. We can access things directly. We can talk to each other, but we don't have access to those special servers. We don't have access to everything that is being held by these institutions of power. And there's different versions. There's religious institutions, academic institutions, military and government institutions, and each one of them seems to have its own system of organizing information. So let's talk a little bit about abduction towards the end of this book. And I'm going to have to spend some time putting my notes together about the cases and just digesting what I read, because this is just like a ton of information. But the thing that really stuck out to me was this idea of fear, and how we need to face our fears, and we need to basically transcend the fear. And that sounds so like woo-woo and wishy-washy and esoteric maybe, but it's important. And it's coming out of this abduction research. It's coming out of this whistleblower today. It's coming out of Tom Campbell's work. It all boils down to dealing with our fear. This guy Matthew Brown is saying his fear is that we, humanity, are going to destroy ourselves with our own fear and greed, which we see happening. There's evidence of that happening every single day. Tom Campbell says that in order to lower entropy and evolve towards love and therefore create enough individual units of consciousness that are moving in the right direction to tip the scales, we have to face our fears and overcome our fears. And a lot of the spiritual experiences that occur out of body or in dreams or through meditation are designed to test our fear and to help us move through limiting beliefs and fears. And then in this book, Abduction, let me find where I underlined. God, there's so much interesting stuff in here I want to talk about, but I need to organize. So it really, like, on the final page, the conclusion is about love. It's about love. And I know it sounds like, yeah, you always talk about love, Shakti. What is love even? But it's pretty simple, you know, but it is feeling based, and it's also very powerful, and it's probably a big key to the things that we need to deal with here on the planet. But anyway, the connecting principle, the force that expands our consciousness beyond ourselves, appears to be love. In the discovery of a fundamental, loving interconnectedness, we might overcome the sense of fragmentation and evolve toward wholeness as individuals, family members, and planetary citizens. From this perspective, the Earth would no longer be simply a marketplace, its lands and resources divided among competing human groups. The Earth would become the jewel in the crown of our being, the place where we experience once again our connection with a cosmic source from which we have become too separate. As our psyches open, we could abandon the dualistic thinking that has divided mind from matter and the physical from the spiritual world. This is John Mack's conclusion of like working with over 75 abductees and hearing what they went through and what they learned. And in the final case that he includes here, he always gives just the first name, this guy Arthur. This is a case from 1993. This is what Arthur's all about. Basically, his case made Mack think about this big picture stuff. So here's another selection from the beginning of chapter 15 now. I have selected this case, the investigation of which has only just begun, to conclude the series because I believe it offers a positive example among the possible human futures that lie before us. To a large degree, it is our collective behaviors as expressed through institutions that impact the Earth's ecology most profoundly. Among these institutions, for-profit business corporations, which impact every part of the globe, are perhaps the most powerful agents of planetary destruction that human beings have created. Whew. So yeah, it's this greed. You know, I was going to go into, it's the white supremacist capitalist, blah, blah, blah. It's fear and greed is what it comes down to. Because all the institutions are made up of humans, individuals. And those individuals are making choices. And those choices are either coming from love or fear. It just boils down to that. So it's like we each have an individual responsibility to just check ourselves on a daily basis. Every decision that we make, is it driven by fear Are we living in fear? Are we allowing greed to make all of our choices for us? Or are we willing to face the discomfort of that growth edge and move beyond our lower instincts into a more loving way of being? And it's hard work. It's actually very hard work, and it gets easier the more you do it, but it's not like a fluffy thing, it's the soul work that we are here to do. And once we've checked ourselves and we feel like, okay, I'm on the right track, I've been doing this for years, I'm in love, I'm in a spirit of love, I'm operating mostly in this way, and I still feel so powerless because it's like these bigger powers that be are still making all the big decisions that are impacting reality. Well, we got to work our way up. This is that whole grassroots things. We got to now swim upstream and get up into those other levels of what's going on and be able to influence that. And I don't know how it'll happen. I don't know if it's through personal exchanges that we have with individuals or if it's through group efforts, but just shaking our fists at the wind and blaming people and just talking about how much they suck, that's not doing it. That's not getting it done. So we need to get smarter about what our path forward is here. We've talked about the telepathy tapes on this podcast, and one of the things that we learned from the telepathy tapes is that telepathic, nonverbal autistic people mentioned that they have a difficulty accessing their telepathy when they're in a crowd of people because there's so much negativity. There's so much negative and fearful energy that blocks the telepathic communication. Well, lo and behold, some of the abductees back from the 90s are saying the same thing. Part of what they're learning is telepathy from these non-physical beings, aliens. There's a whole slew of different kinds of experiences in this book. And he breaks it down at the end in his analysis where it's like, yes, we have the physical stuff, we have the non-physical stuff. There seems to be this interdimensional thing going on. We'll get into all that. But basically, they talk about eliminating fear. So the way you communicate with these beings is telepathically, but the only way that you can achieve that telepathy is by eliminating fear. That fear will block it. You won't be able to communicate with them until you can get rid of the fear and other negative emotions. If you feel negatively, if it is fear or anger or destructiveness or anything like that, they don't communicate that way. They simply want to be communicated with by not being feared. And that is the kind of reason they have a difficulty with humans. So this is according to one abductee. This is his take on it. This doesn't necessarily describe everything that's going on, but it's interesting. It's interesting, like I said, to add up all these pieces and think about them as one big picture and try to figure out what's going on here. Another quote about fear. This is John Mack saying, I asked him to say more about fear. It blocks everything, he said. If we are afraid, we cannot communicate with one another, with the beings, or with animals. We can't even let life into us at all. And then he basically had this metaphor where one of his visions that the aliens gave him, because they'll show you a lot of images and things like that, it was almost like this metaphor of this dark blob kind of taking over the earth. What does it mean? Is it like a disease? Is it nuclear destruction? Is it human greed? Or what is that, But he internalized that as this is the threat and the solution is overcoming fear. And the only way is to just challenge little fears at a time that eventually will get bigger. And then people will get stronger. And he says, take the risk of empathizing, saying hello, being nice to everybody. It's so simple. So I just want to close this out with we talked about a lot of intense stuff today. And even watching the weaponized episode, there is like a scary tone to it. And I think that's a part of why I'm so drawn to doing this work, where I want to bring all of this information to you in a way that we can digest and move forward with, where we don't become paralyzed with fear. Which is why I've been curating this channel from the beginning to slowly onboard us all and get us on the same page about what's going on. Yes, there's going to be flashes of fear, moments of excitement, moments of intrigue as you go about learning about this stuff. And that's okay, because fear tests are only going to make us stronger and help us to evolve towards love. So anytime we're faced with something scary, we have to find a way through. And today I am just taking heart in this simple, small idea that what it all boils down to is just we each have free will. We may not have control over this whole huge whatever it is that's going on. And you know what? It doesn't even matter, because we have control over ourselves. We have control over our decisions. Every decision that we make is our own. And the decision to be kind and just acknowledge each other in the world, it may sound like that's not going to stop the war, that's not going to change the president, like that's not going to do everything we need it to do. Well, it's what we can do. It's something that we have the power to do. And it's an important thing, because every little thing can grow into a bigger thing, whether good or bad. So we have this ability to come together every day with whoever's around us and just be on the level and be cool and be kind and maybe stretch ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone and notice our own reactivity, notice our own fear and greed, and when it wants to grab a hold of us and pull us in a direction that might be harmful to someone else or to ourselves or to our environment. Another really beautiful thing that came out of one of these abductees' stories, this girl Sarah, was this idea that we are our environment and our environment is us. And this kind of reminds me of my idea of the world of thoughts and just energy, and how there's not as many boundaries and borders as we might imagine between us and everything else. So just being a frequency of love and being yourself and being true to you. And like, we're not perfect. It's okay. Nobody needs to be perfect. It's just about trying a little bit and getting a little bit better all the time, and having compassion for all the versions of yourself that made bad decisions in the past and did things the wrong way. Like, that's not shameful. That's just part of our evolution. You know, we're all growing and learning, and we have to give ourselves that grace and give it to each other. So I think there's a lot that we can do. And I am always listening out for those little tips from people who are coming to these conclusions, like Tom Campbell. You know, he had all of his own spiritual experiences and his own scientific research, and in the end, it all boiled down to just love. You know, it's not that crazy. It's kind of like what everyone's been saying for all of time. So that's one layer. And then I think there is like more to do. You know, we have to learn, we have to stay alert, we have to mobilize at times, and we have to organize and do different things. But when that's all feeling overwhelming and you might be having a moment where you're just like, I don't know what to do and it's all too much, then it's just focus back in on what's in front of us. Have I taken care of my body today? Have I taken care of my space? The space around me. It matters how I interact with the things around me. This is how indigenous cultures have always been with the earth, and we now live in boxes that kind of make us feel separate from things, but we're not separate. We're still touching our environment, influencing it, affecting it with our energy, with our thoughts, our words, our vibration, our frequency, how we move, what we're bringing to the table. So just being ourselves is enough, and it is powerful, and it is everything. Thanks for being with me. I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.